Welcome to The Explainer, everyone. Today, we're unpacking a highly compelling and honestly deeply sobering source text that examines the mechanisms of state control in Pakistan. This analysis takes us on a deep dive into how a nation's narrative is managed, not just through your standard traditional governance, but through a totally intricate architecture of power. If you've ever wondered to understand the unseen forces shaping public perception and political reality in the region, well, this material breaks it down step by step. So let's get right into it. Right off the bat, the text introduces this really powerful central metaphor. It describes the state's power structure as a highly efficient machine. But according to the research, the primary product of this machine isn't what you'd expect. It's not legislation, it's not national security, and it's certainly not economic prosperity. Its primary product is control. The argument here is that this entire apparatus is fundamentally designed to dictate what the public believes, what they're allowed to feel, and ultimately the very story the nation tells itself about itself. So you might be wondering, who exactly is operating this machine? The source points to a concept that's pretty widely known in the region as the establishment. But here's the fascinating part. The author defines this not just as the army generals or the politicians acting alone. Instead, it's this invisible partnership between the two. The military leadership sets the rules, and the compliant political parties simply agree to play by them. This partnership, the text claims, sits entirely above the official elected government to quietly dictate the nation's trajectory. To deconstruct all this, our explainer is going to hit 5 main beats. First, Pakistan's invisible establishment. Then, the strategy of denial. Third, silencing the opposition. Fourth, controlling the narrative. And finally, the limits of fear. Starting off with part 1, Pakistan's invisible establishment and the architecture of power. The author makes a really bold claim here. You basically cannot understand major events in this country, a crisis, a scandal, a controversial decision, without first grasping this overarching power structure. The establishment's true endgame isn't the superficial goal of just winning elections. Actually, the real objective is entirely about shaping public opinion. Our material asserts that an enormous amount of energy goes into manipulating perception so thoroughly that citizens don't even realize their opinions have been manufactured for them. The goal is to make absolutely sure that only the establishment's version of the truth reaches the public mind. Moving on to part 2, the strategy of denial, or what happens when the machine uses force. So what happens when everyday people just say enough and refuse to accept a managed truth, when they step out to protest for their basic rights? Well, the source claims this is when the machine stops being abstract and starts using physical force. Anchoring the argument in recent events, the text outlines a clear timeline. In May of 2024, clashes broke out in Azad Jammu and Kashmir, or AJK. Then, in November of 2024, thousands marched on the capital, Islamabad, demanding a political leader's release, only to be met with a lockdown city, mass arrests, tear gas, and reportedly bullets. Finally, in the autumn of 2025, a second wave of protests swept through AJK. According to the reporting, these citizens weren't asking for a revolution. They were just asking for basic rights, and yet they were met with lethal force. To really put the severity of this into perspective, the analysis highlights a specific, tragic figure from those autumn 2025 protests in AJK. 10. Around 10 people, protesters and police alike, reportedly died, with over 100 injured. And what were they protesting over? The text notes it was literally over the basic costs of survival, like the price of electricity and flour. This is juxtaposed entirely against the lavish privileges of the elite. But the most chilling tactic identified here is how these casualties are handled. An admitted killing, as completely tragic as it is, can at least be questioned and investigated. But a denied killing? That can be buried. The documentation claims the government simply denied that any protester had been killed in the capital, labeling the reports as pure propaganda, despite claims of actual bodies and death certificates. Our material argues this outright denial isn't a mistake. It is a calculated national policy designed to spread fear from household to household until the entire nation learns to just keep its head down. Which brings us to part 3, silencing the opposition and erasing a threatening voice. The logic the source highlights here is pretty dark but effective. You don't need to frighten everyone individually if you can make a brutal, very public example out of a major threat. The author uses the case of Imran Khan as the ultimate proof of this dynamic. Whatever you might think of his politics, it's noted he was a genuinely popular figure who spoke directly to millions. Yet, as the timeline outlines, he's been imprisoned for roughly 3 years. It's argued that a state does not go to such extraordinary lengths to silence someone who is powerless. It silences the voice that the machine actually fears. So how exactly is this silencing executed? Our material details a rapid and totally relentless campaign to dismantle his political force. I mean, it wasn't just imprisonment. Reports suggest he was buried under a literal mountain of legal cases, cut off from family and lawyers, and completely erased from public view. Meanwhile, his party faced a systemic crackdown. We're talking party leaders disappearing into cells and immense pressure on grassroots workers to just abandon the movement. According to the findings, all of this happened simply because this movement refused to bow to the establishment in the expected way. Now, let's look at part 4, controlling the narrative, or what the text calls the dimming of daylight. Because, controlling the streets and jailing leaders is really only half the battle. To keep a population compliant, the machine absolutely has to manage the flow of information. The text describes a media environment that's heavily driven by self-censorship. Journalists operate under unwritten rules, specific names are totally banned from the airwaves, and entire careers are destroyed just for asking the wrong questions. On top of that, during those lethal protests we discussed earlier, it's noted that the internet was cut and cameras were conveniently directed elsewhere. The goal, the analysis asserts, is to ensure the whole process happens in controlled dimness, rather than out in full daylight. The psychological toll of all this, it's profound. I actually just want to read this quote directly from the source because it really hits the nail on the head. The result is a population that is kept in a fog, informed enough to feel afraid, but never fully shown the truth that might make them demand change. So this all leads to a pretty cynical, yet highly structured formula for how power is actually attained in this environment. The analysis argues that the parties who end up ruling are rarely the ones who challenge the real centers of power. Instead, it's this unspoken deal. Step 1, follow the establishment's script domestically. Step 2, follow the instructions of powerful foreign patrons. The text specifically mentions America here. And Step 3, do those two things and the path to the Prime Minister's house opens smoothly. But it's noted, if you try to demand genuine sovereignty, that path is instantly blocked by shipping containers, tear gas, and prison walls. And that takes us to our final section, Part 5, the limits of fear and the enduring human element. Okay, so after detailing this massive, heavy architecture of control, the focus shifts to a much more hopeful assertion. This control is never total. Every system of repression relies on the public believing that resistance is pointless, right? Yet the research points out that citizens in AJK still protested, despite lethal risks. Workers marched on the Capitol fully aware of the danger waiting for them. And millions of people continue to speak a jailed man's name out loud. The underlying observation here is that while a state can definitely cut the internet, jail a leader, or even deny a death, it literally cannot reach into the hearts of millions and delete what they inherently know to be true. Which leaves us with one final, incredibly provocative question posed by the source text. How long can a nation be ruled by fear before the fear finally wears off? The author suggests that history shows us it's never forever. It's a really powerful thought to end this explainer on. Does managed truth actually have an expiration date? I'd absolutely love to hear your takeaways on this framework of control. Do you believe that people can stay silenced indefinitely, or does the truth always find a way to break through? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.